Hello, welcome to Framework, the official podcast of Lone Wolves Studios. I'm Al Schwartz. With me again is Chris Prentice.
Hey Al, how's it going?
It's going good. We ran so long on our last Sopranos episode that now we're just going to talk about the finale entirely. I introduced us as a Lone Wolves Studios production. That is one of my favorite tiny little gags in this finale. That the name of Little Carmine's movie studio is apparently Lone Wolves Production. You know,
Yeah.
it's the same joke as the three Amiga or no, the Lone Rangers in Airheads.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah. well, hey, if look, I always say if you're gonna have a production company, do a movie about a detective solving the murder of virtual prostitutes, you go with the Lone Wolves pictures.
I mean, it's right in their wheelhouse.
Oh yeah, they know that genre better than anybody.
If there is any episode from The Sopranos that could transfer over, do a crossover with the movie Airheads, Little Carmine could stroll right in
Oh yeah,
to the hostage situation in Airheads. And you might think it'd be Steve Buscemi, who's in both the show and the movie, but no,
that's
it's
right.
definitely
There
Little
is.
Carmine.
Yeah, no, I think anybody who's been listening up to this point knows that Little Carmine is kind of maybe is my stealth favorite character, and there's never a scene where pops up where I'm not smiling. I don't care what's going on. It's just he is the stealth MVP for me.
He's not even a sixth man. You know, he's a
No,
deep bench player, but he
he's
always performs when he
yeah,
comes on.
he's a 3-point specialist, plays no defense, but if
Yep.
you're down by 6 with 2 minutes to go, you got to have him in there because he can hit the three. Just such an amazing character.
He is not in Made in America very much, however. He
No,
does show up during the sit down, but
right?
this. So before we get to the final sequence, which is like what the main thing to talk about here, like, what do you think about the episode as a whole? Like, I feel like it gets overlooked
Oh,
almost
yeah,
entirely.
I think it's excellent. I mean, it's kind of a shame that it always kind of drove me nuts that it just kind of got boiled down to that last moment, and you don't
Sure.
get a lot of discussion or a lot of talk about the episode as a whole. But I think it's fantastic. I mean, there's so many great moments in this episode. I mean, I love the fact that how excited Agent Harris is when he finds out that basically Jersey has kind of won the war. Um, there, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
apparently
fantastic.
based on a real life anecdote
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
about an FBI agent who was later indicted for feeding intel
Oh,
to,
okay.
I think, the Colombo crime family, but got a little too excited in the offices when he heard that they had taken out a rival during a gang war in the 70s.
Oh,
Probably the
wow.
same one that Polly claims to have survived by the skin of his
Oh,
nuts.
the nuts. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I also
Talk
I
about
think
another perfect moment though in this finale is Carmela's moment when Hunter Scagarello returns,
oh yeah, yeah,
um, and
yeah.
she's just
The fact that she's
she's
not
like,
a screw up and how disappointed Carmela is about that.
yeah, she has turned things around. Like, I mean, Carmela is like proud of herself for subtly bringing up like her troubles with the law and alcohol or whatever. But she hears that Hunter has turned things around and is in medical school, which is what she had wanted for Meadow. She just immediately flees the scene
Oh, I
in a
know.
way
Yeah,
that,
that's just too much for her to the
yeah,
fact that because who knows how long it has been since she's heard anything about Hunter, but she just kind of has it in her head that oh she's screwed up, and thank God that Meadow hasn't gone down that path, and so to have her say oh I turned things around, I'm in medical school, everything's going fine. It's just to me that's just it's like as much as we see Carmela as a victim because of everything that Tony's done on this show, it's moments like that where you're like, oh, she's not really, she's better, but not by a whole hell of a lot.
yeah, I'll quibble on that. She's no better. Like, she is a lot better, but
She's a
she
lot
still
better. Well,
can
she's
be
not a
remarkably
murderer.
shitty.
She's not a
She can be
murderer.
remarkably shitty.
Yes, but
And
she's
I mean,
not.
just Edie Falco in the span of like 2 lines in 45 seconds, just perfectly captures this
Oh yeah.
essence of pettiness and jealousy. And she just, the way she takes the news that Hunter is doing well, like a punch to the gut, is great.
Oh, I know. The fact that a young person who's been able to kind of, reform and turn their life around is upsetting to her. It's just, to me it just sums her up fantastically.
Yeah, it's a great pairing with the moment actually is from the episode before where Tony and Carmela and Vesuvio and the Bucos come over, and
Oh
they're
yeah.
trying to like spin Meadow switching from pre med to law school
Right.
as a positive, and like
Yes.
nobody's really buying it, but she like is overselling it and starts to get to the point where she's saying like, well, I don't think Meadow would have been a great doctor anyway because I don't know if she's like if patience and compassion come naturally to her, and Tony's like, wait, hold on, what?
Yes, yeah. That's the look on Tony's face there is priceless. As yeah, you're right.
It's fantastic.
She's totally overselling it. It's again, she's not a murderer, but she's not a good person.
No. Um, so what else we got going on this episode? We got Phil Leotardo gets sort of a pretty grand exit as
Oh
far as
yes,
mob,
that's
gangland slings
we
go.
get it's it's like we only get one death, but it's a pretty good one. It's a pretty good send off for Phil there. I don't know if you
Well,
ever.
it's debatable whether we get one or two deaths, but we'll get there.
Well, yeah, but I don't know if if you ever watched. It was a series on Adult Swim with Chris Elliott, Eagle Heart. This was on maybe
I think I
about
saw one of them.
6 or 7 years ago, but they did a sequence where they basically just parodied Phil's death from The Sopranos, and they just did it so well. It was perfect, right down to all the great reaction shots and the vomiting, and it's that's kind of the legacy of Phil's death to me was a fantastic parody on Eagle Heart.
Well, I can't picture a parody of that that's not just Ricardo Montalban's death and Naked Gun.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty close. That's right. That is kind of the somewhat the equivalent of it, but it's you got a lot going on between he gets shot and then he's got the you got his obviously his wife is panicked and the kids in the back seat and just the slow shot of the tire going over Phil and I mean I'm glad that they didn't get as graphic as they probably could have with that. I think they did it. They handled it. The show has never shied away from being
The,
graphic, but they did it perfectly. I
right.
think.
Well, cutting to the inside of the kids just sitting and like staring placidly in the car seats as the SUV slightly rises is
Mm-hmm.
pretty perfectly done.
Mm-hmm.
Arguably, the like bystander cutaway reaction shots are a little bit overdone. I think particularly how weird I find the one guy who appears to be like uh,
That's some kind of
John
issue.
Waters with hip dysplasia.
Something like that. Yeah. There's I don't know exalt the
He goes,
whole
"Oh
story.
shit!"
Yeah. Well, and then yeah, then the one youngster vomiting at the sight of it.
Yeah, right. But it's Phil. Nobody was feeling sympathetic to him. Really, like
No.
we can be amused by how that went. Although arguably it plays into the final scene too, in a way that we can touch on in a minute. But there's
Yeah.
one other
I
like
mean,
big question I think in this in this episode, Dancer, which is Chris, who is this cat reincarnated, uh, a reincarnation of?
yeah. Well, I mean, obviously they're telling us that it's Christopher. I mean, at least that's what I feel like the show is trying to tell us. Um, I mean that's all. I mean, I kind of like the way how Paulie is so annoyed by the cat. I think that stuff works pretty well.
I do not. I do not accept that it is Christopher reincarnated,
Okay.
partly because I don't believe in reincarnation and I
Well, yeah.
find it kind of trite and dumb. It's just to do that in the show. I mean, this is sort of my issue with like all like ghosts and hauntings anyway. But it's like, okay, so Christopher's reincarnated as a cat, but why? What, so he wants to come and stare at a picture of his human self all day? That's all he wants to do. Like
Well, I mean,
what does he
maybe
get out of the?
Maybe it's the reincarnated spirit of Adriana. That might make a little more sense.
That's that's the other theory. She was partial to like cat and leopard print
Yeah,
clothes.
yeah.
Uh, and it might make a little more sense that I guess I could see the staring at the lost love more than just staring at, oh yeah, that's what I looked like. But I don't know. Look, sorry, I think it has more to do with raising the specter of Schrodinger's cat, which I think is kind of what the final scene is going for ultimately.
Oh, okay, so you feel the
Um,
cat really plays into to everything going on almost at the end of this episode.
well, a little bit. I don't know. Like the thing is, I mentioned before that I started reading a bunch of interviews with David Chase, at least what he would grant, and uh, he seems to have this different perspective on the show now. That to the extent that he talks about the ending, he talks about it as being a lot more sentimental than people wanted to take it as, um, and being a little more straightforward. And also that that the metaphysical stuff that uh, kind of peeks around the edges of the show from time to time. I think he was kind of more into that. I think honestly, like the sense I get from reading stuff from the last couple of years is that I'm glad that like modern day David Chase can't go back and like fix the show because I think he would ruin it. Um,
Well, I mean, I feel like we sort of got a little bit of what that might be like with many Saints of Newark. I think that is
mm,
if that's kind of where he's operating on at this point, then yeah, thank God that The Sopranos happened when it did because I don't know if he has whatever. Who am I? But what I don't know if he has as firm a grasp on these characters as he did back then.
yeah, maybe. I just think like I think that the metaphysical stuff, the supernatural stuff, is done with just enough, like just about the lightest of hands. I mean, not the lightest, but it gets any heavier. I think it starts to screw up things for me because I'm not a very spiritual person.
No, neither am I.
I'm a what you see is what you get kind of guy.
Yeah, me too.
Wax philosophical or whatever about the subconscious or subtext or whatever. But in terms of there being actual like higher beings or other planes of existence, I'm more of a skeptic.
Yeah.
And I don't. I think Chase, he kind of got this earlier that he's got a bit of a contrarian streak to him and how he relates to the audience. And so I
Yes.
think he's a little frustrated still that everybody's so obsessed with the mob, blood and gut stuff, and so hung up on whether Tony lived or died at the end that they, take for granted or don't appreciate you know, the coma dream stuff or the indications of actual supernatural stuff that he deployed, fairly subtly. But I feel like he might go back if he was going to go back and fix things a la George Lucas. You would be a heavier hand there, and I don't think the show would be as strong as it is for that.
Oh no, I yeah, like to me, I felt that for the most part, the show handled metaphysical, the dreams, all that type of stuff. For the most part, it did it well. Later on, like we've discussed with the Tony getting shot, and even to me the test dream, I thought it kind of ran amok and got a little bit out of hand. And so yeah, if he was going to be looking to infuse more of that into the program, I no, that's they did it just right for the most part. Got a little out of hand towards the end, but it's fine as it is.
Yeah, so I think at least the vibe I get, and we're getting kind of into armchair psychoanalyzing a person we haven't met or whatever, but
Right.
that it felt to me as the series went on in the last season or 2 seasons especially, like there was some frustration that maybe the audience wasn't getting how bad of a guy Tony was or these people were, and
Yeah.
so the final season lays that on pretty thick. And then since then, I get the impression that like there's some frustration on Chase's part that well now people who thought he was too good of a guy for 5.5 years. Now, once the show was over, decided, well, he was a monster and he was such a shitty guy and all that, and so the hell with him, and we're done with him, and he sort of resents that too. And is like, but you cheered him on the whole way, like all the way up to the final step, and now you want to like wash your hands of that and be like, yeah, well, he was shitty all along, and I don't care for him. And so that's where I think you get the quotes all the time. I really love him saying how he didn't think Tony had gotten that much worse, and that he views this final episode in a much more sentimental fashion than a lot of the commentary on it would have it.
Well, and I would also think that he's obviously kind of sentimental now because a lot of the things that he hasn't done a lot of stuff since The Sopranos, and none of it has quite hit. The movie that he made didn't really go anywhere. I mean, it was okay, but it didn't really go anywhere. Many Saints didn't really do much. So, I think he's bound to be more sentimental about it now because it's got to remind him of his greatest success. I mean, when this was going on, it's like who was more lauded in television or especially behind the scenes of television than David Chase when this was going on.
Yeah, but I don't get the sense that he's like that sort of egomaniacal. That he's the way I don't know. I'll throw Nick Pizzolatto under the bus. Seems to like fit that the mold
Yeah,
of like really buying into their own hype that way. I think he was always seemed ambivalent about it and a bit removed to it from that. But I think he's more sentimental, like you said, just because he hasn't had anything as success. I mean, maybe he's super proud of the movie he made, but it was not a success in the same way, and that
no,
has to be
it
frustrating.
it
Plus, the
kind of
death
came
of
and went.
Gandolfini, I think, has
Well,
to hang
that
over it too, and like make yeah.
sure. That's I think informed pretty much how everybody involved with the show. I think a lot it has to. I mean, it's that was even I just watch the show and it has a big impact on me just when I revisit it and kind of my thoughts about him. It's very powerful and of shows just how big a larger than life figure that he was that it's like even to this day it's one of those when I watch the show, it's almost hard to believe that he's not around. So I can only imagine that sort of feeling for anybody who actually worked on the program.
Yeah, and there is a sense just where if you go whole hog in writing off Tony Soprano as a human being or a character as being this completely irredeemable piece of shit, it almost feels like you're impugning the work that Gandolfini put into it to make it more rounded than that and, more complicated and more human.
Sure.
Um, and, you know, I can see that, especially for people who worked closely with him. Like, I don't have quite the same compunction about that, but
No,
also
no.
maybe Chase has got me pegged though too, and that there is an element where I'm trying to like absolve myself of enjoying the show so much by condemning Tony so harshly in the final analysis.
I mean, it's like it's a weird thing with these kind of shows because the reason they go out of their way to show how quote unquote cool these guys are, and that's really what gets us in the door is, oh man, I really love hanging out with these mobsters. These are just the funnest guys, man. Wouldn't it be great to kind of be around them? And yeah, they can show us do as many horrifying things as they want, but really the whole way, at least to me, they still seem like guys. Oh man, wouldn't it be fun to just hang out with them for an afternoon? Even when they're at their worst, it's I still kind of feel that way. I mean, maybe it's not a very bright opinion to have, but that is how I feel.
Well, I mean, you're definitely right that, and I think there is something there too, that it's not just like a cynical, manipulative thing of how do we get audiences, in the door, like get our hook in so that we can feed them all this psychotherapy and test streams and bullshit. Uh, it's more that I think there is an element to it. You do have to be somewhat honest about how there is an allure and an appeal to behaving badly in this way.
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
people wouldn't
these.
risk what these people risk to live this lifestyle if this lifestyle didn't have genuine benefits.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you're just a regular working guy, working stiff, whatever. You got your commute in the morning and your commute back home in the afternoon. Of course, your mind is going to drift to, oh man, the life of a gangster. Yeah, you're screwing over this person. You're getting paid big money. You're wearing the fancy suits. I mean, that's kind of been why gangster movies have been popular forever. Essentially, is people, it's maybe it's wrong, but it's hero worship. I mean, it's like that. Ah, man, wouldn't that be the life? And yeah,
Well, it's getting to throw your weight around, act without constraint, to like,
exactly. The rules
inspire
won't
fear is
apply.
a big part of it.
Yes.
You're right, like money is a part of it, but the clothes never did anything for me. Like to me, it's not the fancy suits; it's the appeal is, oh, I could wear the same tracksuit every day. Like
Well, those
that'd
are
be
the
kind of nice.
fancy suits I'm talking about. That's what I mean.
Okay,
Yeah. I don't need the fancy stuff.
but no, it's yeah. I mean, it's there has to be something seductive about the life, or else
Yeah, or else you
it
have no
doesn't have. I
show.
mean, there's nothing worth. Yeah, like well, yeah, and also like it wouldn't exist at all in
Right.
the real world. Not the Sparrows is docudrama exactly, but it's the mafia is a thing that exists. Organized crime is a thing that exists. Crime is a thing that exists. And people wouldn't do it if they didn't have reasons for doing it. Um,
Exactly.
anyway, but I think it's time we move on to the final sequence and go on to the basic question of, does Tony live or die at the end?
Look, I say he does. I know this is maybe not the most popular opinion, but I always looked at it as the audience got whacked. That Tony lives on. We've been whacked. We don't get to see what goes on with him anymore. We're the ones who are being shut out, not him.
Well, Chase kind of shut down that interpretation in one of the things I read, but
But
uh,
even
he also
he,
kind of had it both. He said it in different interviews. He'd said it different ways.
yeah,
To me, it sounds like he slipped up at least at one point and said, referred to as a death scene. It was initially conceived of as a death scene uh, in a much different context.
right,
But he definitely was trying to raise the spectrum. So where I'm at is that for for 10 years after the show came out, or I guess we're at 15 now since the finale,
yeah,
but I always took it as like, well, he's probably alive. Like, but it's kind of pointless to argue over alive or dead because the whole point of cutting it off at that point is to do a Lady of the Tiger thing where you can't definitively prove one way or the other. So, you know, trying to like either like berate somebody into saying your way or point by point prove it is like, well, but if there is a definitive answer that he is dead, then they could have just put the sound of a gunshot in there at the
yeah,
very least, or show us all things like they didn't do that purposely, so you can't say for sure he's dead, and that means I guess he's probably alive. Um, However, watching it this time, this final season, it hit me almost like, oh no, like I think he's definitely dead. Like I think this is all seems to be constructed to lead up to the point of doing a different type of death scene, one that is less definitive, maybe and doesn't give the audience exactly the closure they're looking for, the blood and guts, but walks right up to it in such a way that I think suggests very, very strongly what happened there is that a bullet entered the back of his head.
right. So why? But why do you feel that way now? Like, what in that scene has basically kind of crossed you over to that line of thinking?
Well, so the biggest piece of evidence that gets trotted out all the time, I think for good reason, is the talk with Bobby in Sopranos home movies, where they're talking about you probably don't even hear it when it happens, right?
Yes.
And at the end of the Blue Comet, they flash back to that line, which is something the show hardly ever did. Like there are probably three or four like actual flashbacks within the show to a scene that had previously occurred in the show, and that
Yeah.
seems like a pretty big thing to underline there. And then in stage 5, Silvio is at the table where Jerry Torchiano is hit, and they film that in such a striking way to underline how he doesn't he just gets splattered with blood before he realizes what's going on,
Yes,
and
yes.
even tells Tony about it later and says, "Funny thing is, I didn't even know it was happening until it was over. I didn't even hear it until he was already dead." And that already is putting together a pretty you know like that's a lot to go on in my opinion. But beyond that, there's a lot of littler stuff too. Um, there's the final episode opens with Tony appearing to be like lying in state with organ music playing, and it turns out he's
Yes.
lying on this mattress, and it's a classic rock song coming in. But
Hmm.
it's definitely suggestive there. Uh, you got the members only guy. I don't think that's particularly definitive, but for those if you haven't seen it in a while, Gene Pontecorvo is mocked for wearing a members only jacket in the episode called Members Only, which was the first episode of the sixth season.
Yeah.
In that, Gene walks into a burger joint wearing that members only jacket and shoots a guy in the head while he's
Yes.
eating a burger. Um, Also, in that episode, Tony is shot and almost killed while wearing basically the same T-shirt. Um,
So, well, okay. So let me ask you this. Okay, so you believe he's dead. That's how the series ends. Well, who
yeah,
who killed him and for what
there's
reason?
another bit of evidence, but I want to give you before I launch into this. Just it's filmmaking stuff that
Okay.
came up a lot in the Chase interviews. But if you want to dispute any of what I was just rattling off there, go right ahead.
To me, I'm look. Maybe I'm just more of a meat and potatoes kind of person, but I just don't know, like, who in that restaurant would want to kill him, and at that point, why is somebody trying to kill him? I know that he's the boss of New Jersey, and there's a whole laundry list of people that could have, and some people say, "Oh, the one guy in there, he kind of looks like Robert Patrick, but it's not him, so whatever." And then you got the guy who's like, "Oh, that kind of looks like Tony's dad." Well, it's not. So who is trying to
It
kill
kind of
him?
looks like Gene Pontecorvo, but it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not his brother. No, I don't put any weight into that especially. But you have one of the times when he looks up when he's waiting for Meadow. It's a couple of young black guys come in, and we've seen the MO of the mob to contract out uh, their when they want to whack a mob boss to a pair of unidentified black males, as the episode title
Yeah.
goes. But I also think that it's really, especially when you're looking at that sort of filmmaking grammar that I'm going to pretend to know about here of that final episode, it's suggesting that members only guy is the guy who does it. But I don't think it's an independent operator. It's I mean, it could be revenge. And in the interviews that I read with Chase, he did say like, well, yeah, like I didn't feel like we needed to justify like who would be a threat to Tony at that point, because for a guy like that, there's always a threat. You know, he
Yeah,
does have
there's
to always look over his shoulder.
there's always a threat, but at that point in time, I'm not really sure who the threat is. He made this deal with New York. They were as basically as annoyed with Phil as Tony was at that point. I just don't see at that particular moment, why there would be any urgency to have Tony killed. And that's just kind of always kind of stuck with me, is that the show for the most part was pretty clear about who's being killed and for what reason for the most part. And I would think that if they really wanted to kill Tony off, they should have made that clear as to the who and the why. And if since they didn't do
I
that, I'm still going with the fact that he's not dead.
I really don't think that I don't think they really wanted to kill him off as a thing. I think Chase is very ambivalent about killing him off because he didn't want to leave it in a place that apes, gangster movies since the dawn of time. Just that end up killing the guys and leaving things in a very like pat message of, well, crime doesn't pay, don't you see? Because eventually you get shot. And he's resistant to that, which I think is part of the reason for constructing a death scene in such an unconventional way, and for leaving it a touch unresolved. As far as like who's actually behind it, I think going back to Phil Leotardo's death, Newark, his Phil Leotardo's second in command, Butchie, ultimately he refuses to give up Phil's location to Tony, but he shrugs and says, "If you find him, you do what you got to do." So
Yes.
he kind of gives him a yellow light, a flashing yellow light, if not
Sure.
a green light, to go do it.
Yes.
But then the way that Phil's death goes down, where he is shot in front of his wife and grandchildren, and then his head is smushed so that he can't get an open casket
Proper
funeral.
funeral. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that being seen as, especially as an affront and going against sort of gangster code to do it in front of the family. And so maybe Butchie, in order to sort of solidify his ascension in the New York family, needs to sort of be seen to be acting decisively and to, uh, you know, you can't let a pipsqueak outfit like New Jersey whack a boss of New York. I mean, you're right. That's not like heavily implied or established within the episode itself,
Yeah.
but I think you can connect those dots enough.
It's yeah. I mean, you can. I mean, that's perfectly fair. I just I just don't buy it. I just don't
You can
see.
also read it that he had worked that Paulie has sold Tony out to Butchie, and that's why Paulie's being kind of squirrely about taking the promotion in the final episode. I don't know how much weight I put into that. Um, Again, my Paulie conspiracy theory was that he burnt down the horse stable in
Oh,
season
I know.
four.
We've already clashed on that. I that's no, no.
Incidentally, David Chase, also in one of these interviews I was reading, said no, Ralphie did it. So
Yeah.
he,
Well, for one thing, I do agree with him on there. Finally,
but it's weird to say that there's a definitive answer to that question because, well, you could have. I mean, they could have put that in the show too. They could have established that if that is the. I mean, I guess maybe that works in a roundabout way towards my point uh, of him being dead because that's an example of something that they presented in a deliberately ambiguous way in the show and didn't confirm, but apparently in his mind it was confirmed.
I mean, ultimately, the final shot is successful because it's 15 years later and we're debating it. So to
No,
me, I mean, it's like whatever they thought they were doing, it's a success because it's not it's not a solid answer, and I bet there will be podcasts 15 years from now where people are debating that final shot.
right. Well, the reason that it now that I can't view it any other way is, and this is again stuff from I read Alan Sepinwall and Matt Zollerzeitz, two New Jersey television critics, did a whole book about The Sopranos and included a bunch of interviews with David Chase, including one where he seemed to accidentally refer to it as a death scene and then sort of backtrack on it when they called him on it. But his initial reaction was just a long pause and then "fuck you guys" when they called
Well,
him on making a
yes, like
mistake.
I remember like an interview that when he was promoting Many Saints in Newark, where he kind of
Mm.
calls it a death scene, and but the way that he talks about it, he says like with regards to that restaurant is, oh, that's the kind of place where Tony, where he should be killed. I could see him being killed in a public place like that. I mean, it's like he doesn't, at
Yeah,
least in the interview I saw, he's not coming out and saying, "Oh yeah, Tony got killed in that restaurant," but he's just saying, "Oh, I kind of a picture that that's the kind of place where it would happen."
well, and the way he backtracks on it too is that he's also talking about how the first thought for or his first idea for how Tony's death scene would go is that he will be driving to New York to meet with Johnny Sack or whoever, and
Yes,
it will be sort of a reverse of the opening credits,
right.
but we would know that basically they were planning an ambush for him there, and he would drive into the Lincoln Tunnel and it would cut to black in there. So that's sort of cut to black. Uh, that's the element that stayed through that early draft, which was before the sixth season even was written or anything. And obviously, that's not what they ended up doing. It's a different thing. But the thing that he talks about in these interviews and when talking about, I'm going to pretend that I know about film grammar. I'm just getting it from him.
Huh.
But is that throughout the but now that I read it, I can see it all over the episode. Is that throughout the episode we keep getting shots of from Tony's point of view, where we'll see him look out at something, we see it from his point of view, and then we see him walk into that shot uh, and go to like talk to Agent Harris, and then see him look at Janice from Tony's point of view, and then we see him walk up to Janice to talk to her, except he's closer. Like cuts with him like already in the frame and being closer. When he goes to see Junior, it does it again, but he's even closer. Oh, tiny other bit there. There's an orderly behind him that's like, excuse me, sir," after like gets attention twice when he's looking at Junior. I guess establishing that Tony has a blind spot
Ah,
over his right shoulder, where the guy would be coming out of the bathroom. Anyway,
okay.
that's Zapruder tape level shit, but grain of sand for the scales.
Well,
So
let me.
finally, in the Holston scene, though, we're shortening the length of the transition from Tony looking up at something, and then we cut to Tony's point of view. And so every time the bell rings, we see Tony look up, and then we see a shot of his point of view of the door. And the final time the bell rings, we see Tony look up, and we cut to black, and we don't get his point of view. And that's what cuts. That's what relates back to the you probably don't even hear it when it happens
Silvio
thing.
and Bobby. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
And I don't know. That all especially with the point of view cutting there is a deliberate thing that he had in mind while filming the entire episode. I can't view it any other way now.
well. Let me ask you this. Not so much is he dead or is he alive. Do you want him dead? Does that help you? Does that make anything more satisfying to you? Is the idea that he finally had to pay for everything that he's done?
I mean, sure, I find the idea sexually gratifying, but no, no, that's what I go back and forth on. Is on the one hand, I do kind of feel that killing the gangster at the end is an easy out for the audience. Um, but I think part of what this is doing is it's denying that in its entirety. That the phrasing Chase uses is that the audience wanted to see him face down on the bowl of linguine,
Right.
and not showing him, with a staring off with a hole in his head and his family screaming. I think denies us a bit of that catharsis. So I don't know. I think doing it this way allows it to have it both ways, but in a good way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Because
Um,
I'll just be honest that I don't like the idea that he's dead, and that obviously informs probably my view that I don't think he's dead because I for whatever reason, even though it's a TV character, I like the idea that he's still alive and still as horrible as he was. I like the idea of him still existing in that world.
I don't know. In a way, I find him continuing to exist in that world even sadder than he dies
Oh
because
yeah,
of
yeah,
you look back at the pilot episode and all those guys hanging outside of the pork store, and Silvio drops by, and Christopher's there, and Polly's there, and Big Pussy's there, and Hesh comes by, I think, and they're all like yucking it up, having a great time. And then in that final episode, it's just Polly and a stray cat out there, and
yeah,
the
yeah.
thought that
Well,
Tony's got nobody left but Polly. I don't know. I guess what it comes down to
well,
is
and
I don't want to think about Tony having to go on without Silvio. It's too
well,
sad for me.
and since Paulie is ultimately agrees to take that captain promotion, he's probably because that's a cursed spot
Yeah,
to be in. So he's probably not long for the world.
it's like the Defense Against the Dark Arts position at Hogwarts, or the drummer of Spinal Tap.
Yeah, yeah. He,
That
he
that position
or or
has
or
seen a lot
even
of turnover.
or even worse, he may have to hook up with Janice now.
Oh man.
That might be what Janice is left with. It's Paulie.
I don't know. He was moving in on Bobby's niece at the funeral
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit.
A little bit, yeah, that's true. That's true. But ultimately, I don't know. Once, for whatever reason, once Janice gets her hooks into you, men are just they just can't resist. So it's really her decision, really.
Yeah, that's you need a strategy, a long defensive war if you want to deny Janice what she's after.
Yeah, I mean,
But
yeah, it's if she's got her eyes on you, it's she's just gonna get you. So, I think Paulie was smart to stay away from those kind of jobs for very long, and I think he kind of doomed himself. Uh, Personally, I think he's more likely to be dead than Tony is.
uh, yeah, I mean, I can see that, but I think you raised a very good question there, and I think part of the way the reason why doing the Lady and the Tiger ending works well is that it allows the audience to have it both ways and to depict the way. I mean, maybe especially in Chase's somewhat pessimistic view, maybe a elitist view of the audience, we're mostly going to pick what makes us feel better. But I like that too, that it allows you to pick whichever version you think of as more challenging.
Yeah, yeah,
And if it makes you sad to think that he died there, then you could still choose that as the one that carries more weight and gravity with you.
that's
Versus if you find it worse that he's alive and that what that you know portends about a world without justice or whatever, you could interpret that way too.
yeah, yeah. Either way, I think you've got enough evidence to go either way on it.
All right, Chris, thanks for doing this
Oh, this has
with me.
been
And
this has been a great journey. I've enjoyed every bit of rehashing this series. It never gets old for me. Never.
aged remarkably well, even
Yeah,
for how much it defined its time in the TV landscape, especially like how I cannot believe how well it holds up in the very different world we find ourselves in today.
it's really crazy. I mean, it's crazy how different the world is since this show ended. I mean, this ended basically right at the start of kind of smartphone culture, everyone looking at your phone at all times, and this is almost kind of the last show before all that. And it's I don't know, it's just it, like I said, I could go talk about it forever. It hasn't lost a single step since it first ran.
All right, thanks again, man.
All right, have a good one. Always a pleasure.
See you around.